We're going to be continuing on with our B note on the bottom of the guitar, looking at the intervals around it, practicing the measuring of the intervals, in particular from the bottom of the guitar, which most people don't know how to do, and they try to rationalize that they don't need to do that. That's stupid. Why are you spending so much time doing that? But it's worthwhile to do. That's why it's worthwhile to do. And so that means that we're going to be in the Locrian mode, which once again, most people will be saying, why are you learning Locrian mode? Locrian mode's the crazy guy. You leave him in the corner of the bar. You keep your distance from him because he's crazy. But the Locrian has some applications. You have to communicate with the Locrian. You got to deal with the Locrian. So we're going to learn it, and we're going to see why, if I don't want to play in Locrian, we would still want to be possibly knowing Locrian, possibly seeing it as a modal chord. I want to talk a little bit more this time about extending our conversation about the idea of modal chords versus basically parallel constructions, making things that are inside of the key versus using chords that are using notes outside of the key but are still sounding good, not because I know the magic note that is outside the key that still sounds good, like a blues note or a major third and a minor third if I'm playing a blues construction, but because I'm thinking in terms of half steps or systematic construction, parallel construction. That's the rule that I kind of want to emphasize. Also want to emphasize the idea this time that it's possible for us to take what we know and then convert any of these modes to a related interval using or just changing one interval. So if I know the modes, if I know these notes, I can convert any of these notes to another scale by just changing one interval. And that is true even with the Locrian, although again, most people possibly don't know that because they haven't really thought about it too much on the Locrian because we kind of ignore it. And so let me go over that as we go as well. So remember, our general idea here is that we're trying to practice our intervals and trying to cram up as much information as we can. Before we get into that, I want to go into my intro in terms of why you would basically be doing this. I'm going to scroll back up top, remembering that our general idea is that we're going to take our major scale, not really matter that it's in the key of C on the guitar in particular, even more than on the piano because it's movable. The key of C, though, has a related A minor, which is quite nicely placed in the middle of the guitar, which is a key that many guitar players then learn quite well because of that. And you don't have any sharps and flats that gives us a nice kind of check figure. So that would be the idea. And then I want to compare all of the other modes to it. Now, remember that most people play in the key of in the key of a major key and the key of a minor key, which in modal terms would be the Ionian is the major, and the sixth of the Ionian is the Aeolian or minor scale. So that's going to be the general idea. But even if I always play in those two scales, I still want to know the other modes, at least in terms of modal chord construction. And again, I don't think people talk about like this idea of a modal chord construction as much, because when we do a naming convention of a chord, we don't typically name it as the mode, a modal chord, because that naming convention won't work for every kind of chord that we can create. But it's quite useful if you're trying to think about playing something and trying to switch it up. Like if you know a song and the song is in the key of C and it goes from the 1 to the 4 to the 5, then how could you play with that song and do something new with it? Same kind of tune, but you're going to kind of do something different with it. Well, you could say, I'm going, when I go to the 4 and the 5, instead of just going to the 1, 3, 5, I'm going to add some of the others notes in the chord, or I'll noodle around the chord. I'll play the chord and then I'll do a little noodle pattern around it or something like that. And when I add them, I'm going to be adding the 7, 9, 11, and 13, basically. The 9, 11, and 13 being equivalent to the 2, 4, and 6. So then you're going to inevitably run into the problem of, well, do I add a major 7 or a minor 7? Do I add a major 9 or a minor 9, a major 11 or a minor 11, and so on and so forth as you do that, right? And so the main question comes up will be, well, the question is, do you want to stay in the key using all the same notes in the key, in which case you're doing a modal chord construction, I would call it, right? So if I went to the 4, from the 1 to the 4, I could call it a major, an F major, because the 1, 3, 5, the 3-note triad, will have the structure of a major third. But then let's go to the 5th, because the 5th is clear with the 7. If I did the G major, 1, 3, 5 would be the same. But then when I go to the F, we run into that problem of, do I want to stay in the same key, or do I want to be jumping to like an F major? So if I stay in the same key, if I have that mindset, then I'm doing what I would call a modal chord, right? I'm doing a Mixolydian modal chord related to the C major modes, right? Because in my mind, what I'm trying to do is structure everything around the C major as the key. That's the major key that everything else is compared to. So that means when I go to the Mixolydian, I'm going to say, it's the mode number 5 related to the major key of C, right? And then I make a modal chord from it, which means that from the perspective of this G, the F is going to be a half step back. It's going to be a flattened item. So I think that concept of trying to do a modal chord, building a modal chord, is useful. It gets messy though, because the perspective changes, right? Because when I play in the key of a Mixolydian key, now all the modes, this will be the 1 from a relative position. But if I name the modes with an absolute numbering system related to the major, then that helps me to basically get some perspective on where I'm measuring from. So I find that to be a useful thing. In other words, as I go through this, I'm going to start trying to practice this more, is that this shape right here, this whole shape, has all of the notes that are in C major and all of the other modes. I can name each of these notes as basically the start of the mode, right? So in other words, if I'm in the key of C, this C right here represents relative position 1 relative to the C scale. But if I was on the Dorian scale, then now that same C is now not relative position 1, but it's relative position 7. See how that's a problem? But from a modal standpoint, that C is still the first note in the Ionian. If I started from there, I would call it the Ionian mode, right? Which I can still call mode number 1 if I use an absolute numbering system. So if I was in Dorian, I can call that C relative position 7 to the Dorian compared to the 1 of a Dorian, but I can still call it from an absolute standpoint mode, the modal chord number 1, right? Modal chord number 1, or the Ionian mode. That's the first note in the Ionian. So if I built a chord, it would be centered around this C right here to build what I would call some kind of Ionian modal chord, right? If I looked at the E here, the E's relative position to the major scale would be the 3rd, right? And it would be the 3rd. But if I go to the Dorian, that same E, because they're all the same notes, is now the 2nd. But if it's the same note in my shape here, right? It's the same note here and here. So I can, if I look at it from an absolute standpoint, I could still call it, that's the start of the Phrygian. I don't care if I'm in the Dorian mode or if I'm in the major scale, that E within this shape is still going to construct a Phrygian modal chord if I was to build a chord around that E, right? So notice that this shape, I can start to label this shape in absolute terms by saying this is the start of each modal chord, and I would give a numbering system of the modal chords based on the relative positions of the major scale, because the major scale is the key that we typically compare everything to. So that's part of the project that I'm trying to get in my mind as a way to orientate myself. So you could do with that what you will. We're now looking at the Locrian. So in order for us to understand these modal constructions, then the question is, well, how do I do that, right? We could do that by learning the shape. We can do it by learning the intervals, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and by learning learning the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, whole, and then the intervals, meaning the intervals around each shape. That's what we're doing now, the intervals. That helps with chord construction in particular. So how would we normally do it? Our story goes, you learn the major first because it's our normal key, and then the intervals of the major will be the same for the other major modes, which is going to be the relative 4 and 5, otherwise known as the Lydian and Mixolydian. So those two are going to have the same 1, 3, 5 relative to their root note, but will have a different one of these, 7, 9, 11, and 13. One of those will be different. Only one interval will be different from the major scale. And then I learned the minor scale because it's the second most popular scale, and because the two other minor modes compare to it. So once I learn the minor scale, I can compare the two other minor modes, the Dorian and the Phrygian, to the main minor. They're going to have the same relative positions of the 1, 3, 5, meaning having a minor third, but are going to have one interval that's different between the 7, 9, and 11, and 13 from the Aeolian. So then I can compare that way. And then what about the Locrian? The Locrian is like a minor mode, but it has a flat second. So it's actually close to the Phrygian. So that's what I want to kind of think about. One thing I want to kind of think about before we go into this here on why that might be useful. So notice any of these notes here, any of these modes, then I can convert to another scale very easily, right? So the Ionian mode, for example, if I'm in the key of C, the Ionian is very closely related to the Lydian and Mixolydian. So what's the difference between the Ionian and the Lydian? The Lydian has a augmented fourth. So that means that if I was to go from this F right here, the shape would be exactly the same, but I'd look for the fourth related to the Lydian, and I can flatten the fourth, right? And what would that do? It would change the Lydian from an F Lydian to an F major. What if I wanted to, if I want to go from the C, if I want to make the C, the Ionian, into a Lydian, I would take the fourth, which is the F, and augment it, meaning move it up. So if I want to change the Ionian to a Lydian mode, and I know this shape, because my idea here is that I know this shape, right? And I don't want to learn a whole nother pattern as though it's totally different. I could do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing in the Lydian. How do I do that? Well, I can identify the fourth, and I can augment it. I hope I have that right. I'm almost positive. You take the fourth, and then you push it up, right? If I push that up here, my shape will change from that of an Ionian or major scale to that of a C Lydian. And that should be something that you can kind of do if you're noodling around and you just change that one note. It's not so distinctive that the ear's going to go, wait, he did something wild. You can kind of sneakily go from one to the other and back and forth until the ear gets used to it in a way that's not jarring, right? And then what if I wanted to go from the Ionian to the Mixolydian? Well, the Mixolydian has a flat 7 in it instead of a major 7. So I can look for the 7 then, which is going to be right here, which was a B, and I can flatten it. So if I flatten the 7, then I can use this same shape, and now I can go to the C Mixolydian. So if I know this shape and I can center around this C or whatever C, I can then easily convert to the related modes, the Lydian and the Mixolydian, by identifying the interval, the one note that is different. and that allows me to go from a C Ionian or major to a C Lydian to a C Mixolydian. And all of those shouldn't be too jarring on the ear if you subtly go from one to the other, because you're just going to emphasize one interval that's different, allowing you a whole nother palette of possibilities after you go from one, right? Because if I go from the C to the Lydian, from the Ionian to the Lydian, now I've got a whole nother set of modes that are relative to the Lydian. And I can then change from the Lydian to something else, right? What if I was on the Dorian? If I was on the Dorian, it's going to be close. It's a minor mode, so it's close to the Aeolian. So the thing that's different on the Dorian is it has a 9-note away major 6. So what if I know this shape, which is the same as the C major or the A minor, and is the same as the Dorian, but I don't want to play in Dorian. I want to play in a minor scale. Well, then I could, instead of learning the whole other scale, I could say, well, I already know this. All I need to do is take the that B, the 6th of the Dorian, so I can locate that B and flatten it, right? If I flatten it, now I center around the D. Now I'd be switching from a D Dorian to a D, and it would be all the B's. There's not just one B, right? But you can go just switch that one interval from a D Dorian to a D minor. So what if I wanted to go? Now you can't really. Now if I wanted to go from the D Dorian to like a D Phrygian, then I'd have to change 2 intervals. That gets a little bit more wonky. But you can switch all of them with 1 interval, and that's pretty close. Like the Phrygian. The Phrygian is a minor mode which has a 1-note away minor second. That's the only thing different from the Phrygian to the Aeolian, the minor scale. So if I know this same pattern, it's the same pattern we started with, C major, A minor, and it happens to be an E Phrygian. What if I want an E minor? I don't want to play Phrygian. I want to go to an E minor. Well, instead of learning the E minor shape, instead of taking this entire shape up to the E and trying to figure it out there and then expanding it, one way I can think about it is to say, well, all I have to do is take the second, which is flattened, and unflatten it, make it a major second. So I look for that F, and then I can push it up 1. And so if I take all of the F's and push it up 1, then I can go from a Phrygian, an E Phrygian, or any Phrygian, same concept applies, a Phrygian to a minor. What about the Lydian? The Lydian is a major mode, and it has that augmented 4th, which is here written as a 6-note away diminished 5th, but it's an augmented 4th, right? Because of my formula, same distance of 6 notes away. So what would I have to do? Well, if I'm on an F, if I know this same shape and I'm going from an F Lydian and I want to make it an F major, that would be the most close related mode to change 1 interval. I could just find that B right there, right? And I can say that B has been augmented, so I'm going to bring it back. And so I can look at the same shape and just change it, right? And then on the Mixolydian, a G Mixolydian. So this is the same shape. I have a same shape as the C major, A minor, which is the same as the G Mixolydian, but I want to play the G major. Well, how do I do that? Well, I know the Mixolydian has a 10-note away minor 7, so there's only 1 note I need to change. I can just take that 7, which is an F, right? And it has a minor 7, so I'm going to augment it. Did I go the right way here on this one? I say the Lydian, it was augmented, so we brought it back. And this one, the Mixolydian, is flattened, and we augment it. So I take all the F's and I push it up 1. What about the minor? The minor is only 1 step away from 2 modes, which is the Dorian and the Phrygian. So that means, so I could change the minor into either a Dorian or a Phrygian. How can I do that? Well, the Dorian has the 9th, which is a major 9. So that D, if I want to go from a A minor to a D Dorian, I have the same shape that we started out with. But if I want to go to an A minor to an A Dorian, I should say I take the 4th, which is a D, and I need to push it out to because we flattened it. And if I wanted to go from an A minor to an A an A Phrygian, then I know that has a second. The Phrygian has a flat second, so I can just then take the second and flatten it, taking all the B's and flatten it. And then here's the one that I wanted to say is the new one that I wanted to get to, the Locrian, that we ignore all the time. It seems like you have to change two things to get it to the minor, but it's actually closest to the Locrian. So because it has a minor second and a flat 5. So it's really, the Locrian is the one that has a minor second. So if I know this same shape and I'm saying, okay, I get to the B, I don't want to play in Locrian. How can I convert it to something else as easily as possible if I want to play in the key of B? Well, the the B Phrygian would be the easiest thing to do, right? So here's how would I go to the E Phrygian? Well, the fifth here, all we do is take the fifth, which is that F, and see how that's that tensiony F, and we move it out here so that we have that F. So that would mean that the Locrian can easily be converted into this is a B Locrian could be converted into a B Phrygian scale, right? And once you're in the Phrygian scale, you can convert that into a minor scale by taking the second and pushing it up. So these are just some ideas on how these modal constructions can help you, because that would be, you can noodle around and you can play songs that when they go from chord to chord, try to play a modal chord or some other chord in it. Now, the other thing I just wanted to point out is that when you're playing like a chord construction up and you get to this B, most people learned it on the top string, right? If I'm trying to play in the key of C, let's get that in our ear, and then you played like a G major, and then you play, the next one would be an A minor, which would be a bar chord, A minor, bar chord, and then you get to the B, you'd have to flatten that, right, to get to a B diminished. Oops, wait a sec, let me do it this way. And then get into the major. But let me play it this way so I can see it with just 3 notes though. So like if you're going up to this C, I can play like this G right here. I'm just gonna play it this way with just these 3 notes. I'm going from that G, and then I'm gonna play the A minor. So if I go from this G with 3 notes, it's kind of inverted. Did I do that right here? And then the A minor. Wait a sec, what's happening? There it is. So I go from this G to this A minor that has these 3 notes. And then when I get to the B, notice what happens. The 5th is now above it, gets flattened if I want to stay in the same key. So if I'm on these 3 notes, it goes, and then the A minor, and then this one still has the minor. This shape is the minor shape, but I have to flatten the 5, and then the C. So you can see that last one kind of leads in there. Now you could. What if I don't want to flat this 5? What if I kept it like this, which means it would be just a minor, a B minor. You could possibly do that because the shape is the same as what was before, right? That means you're gonna have a parallel shape between the A minor and the B minor. Right, wait a sec. So that'll probably sound good. So let me just, if I went from I'm trying to get to this C. If I go from here, A minor, and then the B minor. So that doesn't sound bad to me really. And the question comes up like, why? Why it should sound bad because it's out of key, right? But because it should be a diminished going into the C. But I don't think it sounds bad To me at least. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here. But it's because you have a parallel construction, right? So when I go from this minor to that minor, it sounds uniform. It sounds symmetrical because I have these two shapes are the same shape. So I just want to emphasize the idea here is that when you get to that B, you could make it into a diminished chord, but if you're playing, if you play something parallel, then it's probably going to sound good. And the other, because you have a parallel construction. So that's just something to keep in mind. You can also try to do the half step thing, right? So like if I'm going up to this G, I mean this C, this is a C major, right? I could try to play like everything a major before it. Half step, half step, half step. So those are the ways to break the rules generally, right? So the general rule when I get to the Locrian, in other words, is do I want to play a Locrian modal chord, which will be a diminished chord, which will have a flat 5, which is going to sound very tensiony, but resolved nicely if I'm going to the C after that. But if I was in like the Dorian, for example, and I get to that B note, what you're going to end up with if you get to a modal chord, if I play like a modal Locrian, now it's not really leading to the C because I'm not playing in the key of C, I'm playing in the key of D Dorian. So it doesn't really help me to play that really tensiony note because I'm not resolving to the C. I'm trying to resolve to the D, right? So then the question is, when I get to that note, the question, as has been the case before, is, well, do I want to play a modal chord, which means I'd have to play a diminished chord, which would be a Locrian, or maybe I can try a parallel construction. As I'm leading into the D, maybe I just add the 5 that's a normal 5, and then lead into the D, right? Those are your options. Or maybe you do a half step through it, so that when you're going in half steps, that's the other way you can kind of break the rule. So that's going to be the idea. So you might end up feeling like you got to break the rule possibly on that B, so you don't get like that tensiony sound diminished chord. And those are just some ideas that you can do it. And then your mind goes, well, why does that work? Because now I'm playing something outside the key. Why might it work? It might work because you're using a parallel construction, going from minor, minor, minor to a major. Right, the 3 minors are parallel chord construction. They're constructed parallel, right? Similar, or it might work because you're doing half step, half step, half step, walking up chromatically. Okay, so let's go down and do the Locrian. So the intervals for the Locrian are a 0 note away perfect first, a 1 note away minor second. That's the one that's different than not only the major scale, but also the main minor, which also has a 2 note away major second. So it's closer to the Locrian. As we said, it's got a 3 note away minor second, which would we would expect from like a minor mode. It's got a 5 note away perfect fourth, which is what we would expect from both the major and minor. But this is the really weird one. It's got that 6 note away diminished fifth. And then it's got an 8 note away minor sixth, which is what we would expect in a minor, such as the Aeolian or main minor, and a 10 note away minor 7, which is what we would expect with a minor. All right, I'm going to get into the third is where we left off.